Mario. Well, as he said in my bio, I said I build software, but I break it more because obviously, as a developer, you spend more time breaking software and then trying to fix it than actually building it. But anyway, this presentation today is gonna be more of a talk, a discussion, something to introduce to you guys. Maybe you already know about this API because it's new, but it's not that new. It's a couple of years old at this point, but it's still very in development and very early access. I mean, anybody can use it, but it's still, even the documentation, the official documentation and stuff is still work in progress. Before we start, I would just like to say I'm Marko, and thank you so much for attending this talk. The amount of people here is exactly the amount I expected, and I'm happy it's not more because I would be crippled in my legs if it was a lot more people. You might notice a few things on the first header slide. There's two names there, but only one person here. If you recognize Georgi, it's my colleague that held the presentation for Dart before me. And his name stays there because this presentation originally was a two-man presentation. We presented it last year at Beer.js, a local event here in Skopje. And this year at What Does Tech, I'm holding it separately. And out of respect to him and our work collaboration, I'm leaving his name there. So no need to remove that because this is a two-man presentation after all. You might have noticed the name of the presentation is File System Access API, but I've crossed out access. Why? Because at the time when I registered this presentation, the name of the API was File System Access API. A couple of days ago, I checked out the documentation. They changed the name. So now it's just File System API. They took out the access part, which it was confusing for me. Why would you put access? Of course, I want to access the file system. What am I going to do with it? But we're going to be quickly discussing streams because they're one of the core things about this API. It's the main thing this API relies on. But let's get into the agenda. We breezed through the introduction. We're quickly going to discuss what is the file system API, what are the file and directory pickers, the file and directory handles, and we're going to quickly take a look at the streams, and we're going to take a practical look. By practical look, I'm quickly going to tell you some use cases for this API that we've had to do at work. And also, we're going to take a look at a practical site that uses this API today that you can even check out after this talk. And we're going to check out the documentation a little bit. And we're actually going to look at some fights that broke out in the GitHub comment section regarding this API. You'll see why soon enough. OK. So first of all, how do we input files? How can the user attach some files to our web app? Let me rephrase that question. How can we, as developers, access local files on the user's machine through the browser? Any ideas? Yeah? OK. What do you usually have in the form that actually... Right? Input. That's file type that has a type file, right? So there are also two more ways. We're going to check them out now. So, right, the input field with the type attribute set to file. We have drag and drop, and we have paste from clipboard, which is a new fancy way of adding files to our application. So the common thing between the two ways is that they both use the file API on the browser. And the last one uses the clipboard event, which is something different, but we're not going to talk about that today. I mentioned that the first two use the file API because they are different. I'm going to take a short time to discuss why these two are actually different, because they sound the same. We all know that developers have a hard time naming things. You spend more time trying to figure out a good name for a function, for a parameter, and stuff like that. I guess this time they chose to make them very similar. But yeah, both of them have the word file in the definition, but don't confuse them. They are two separate things. The file API and the file system API are not the same thing. They can get the same job done, Well, not really, because the file system API is way more powerful and the file API is more limited. We'll talk about that right now. Let's take a look at the definition real quick. So, file API. The file API enables web applications to access files and their contents. Straight to the point, pretty obvious, right? The file system API allows read, write, and file management capabilities. There's one crucial difference between these two definitions. Can anybody spot it? It's on the screen. Sorry? Right. Yes, but another word. Sorry? Yes, correct. So, the file system API offers management capabilities. What does that mean? That means that we have read, write, file management capabilities. We have more control. We have a lot more access to things. We can do more with this API than we can with the file API. Now, what is the file system API? Well, one of the big problems that we have when working with files through the browser is the actual file sizes. If it's small files, it's no problem. But what happens when you have to work with a file that's 5, 10, 20 gigs large, or even more? So, if you try to work with large files, let's say 10 gigabytes, and you try to work with them in memory, for example, what's going to happen? Well, you can get your cascade ready because you're going to be burying your browser. You're going to use up all of your RAM, you're not going to get any work done, and you're just going to explode the user's browser. So, okay, some people thought like, okay, we can use the file reader from the file API that can use streams, right? We can stream the data. We don't have to load it all in memory at once. Well, the file reader from the file API is limited in that it can only access those files and the directories that the user has specifically selected. So if I open up, let's say I want to open 10 files, I select 10 files, the browser now has access only to those 10 files. And that's very limiting because a user, if we want to do something with those files or some other files, a user has to explicitly select stuff. They have to always click these files, these folders, and stuff like that. And you can't really use it to read files, file paths. Well, you can only select files and select folders. That's it. You can't access paths and stuff like that. Well, this is where we kind of discuss what's the whole purpose. Like, why should you care? Well, you should care because, sorry, we'll get back to it. You should care because the file system API solves these problems. It solves the problem with working with files directly on the system of the user. So the file system API allows developers to build powerful web apps who have some kind of interaction with the file system or need to have some kind of interaction with the file system on the user's machine. And, well, the most basic example for these types of apps are the ones we use every day. Your IDE, right? If your IDE can't access your local file system, then what's the purpose? So online browser IDEs can benefit from this API immensely. Others are photo and video editors. This is a hint to the site we're going to be looking at the end. And text editors and other applications that need to use files. So what can we do with this API? So we can read and write to files and directories, new or existing, so you can write new ones or edit existing ones. Read the contents of folders, creating new folders, or even deleting folders. Generally, any read, write, create, delete access for any directory or files. Now, we're going to quickly look at some of the interfaces that this API offers. In the end, we're going to take a look at the documentation, as I said, because the documentation is only 5 pages. It's very small. Only a few sections. Because this API, as I said, is pretty new, it's pretty limited, and it's a little bit contested. So these are your bread and butter. Whatever you're going to be doing with the file system API, you're going to be using these handlers. The file system file handle represents a specific file, while the file system directory handle represents a directory. Pretty easy, right? Simple. So it handles, the handles allow web applications to perform operations like reading, writing, and managing files and directories. Like I said, these two are going to be your best friends when working with the file system API to work with files. These are the methods, the pickers provided to you. Show directory picker prompts the user to select the directory. Show open file picker prompts the user to select files. Show save file picker prompts the user to choose a name for a file to be saved or overwritten. These are not new, right? These are available to us in a form in the file API. These are used already. These are in production. So again, why should we care? Well, I explained why should you care. I hope you guys understood that part. But in the end, we're going to take a look at a practical example. Now, I've mentioned multiple times that this API allows your apps to do stuff on the local file system of the user. Normally, we have some security concerns, right? We're allowing our web application to do stuff on a user's local file system, or more correctly, the user grants us access. But let's take a look at this. Browsers that support the file system API. You can see Chrome supports it and other Chromium-based browsers. Why? Because Google is the one developing this API. It's a browser API, but it's developed by Google. They started it, they're maintaining it, and doing stuff with it. And there are safety features built in. So it's not like Google didn't take into account the fact that this API allows access to a local file system, because that's the first thing everybody thought of, right? What are you doing? Like, you're going to get hacked or stuff like that. Well, there are safety mechanisms. First of all, this API can only be used through secure context. If you're using HTTP, can't use it. It has to be HTTPS, first of all. Second of all, transient user activation is required. What does that mean? Well, it means that the user has to interact with the page or UI element in order for this feature to work. First of all, we'll see it later, whenever the website wants to use some stuff from the file system API, a prompt shows up from the browser asking the user explicit permission. This action is going to access files on your system. Yes, no, confirm, cancel. So you actually have to give your consent to the web app to access files on your system. Now, you might have noticed Mozilla does not support this API, and also Safari, because what the hell does Safari even support? I mean, who uses Safari? Mozilla does not support this because it does not approve of the API at all. This API is ranked as negative by the Mozilla organization, and they do not approve of it because they say Google hasn't done enough to guarantee the security of the user. HTTPS context, not enough. Transient user activation, not enough. Giving consent, not enough. You have to do more. So they are against this API. We'll see in a little bit. But this is a citation here I took from Mozilla, a quote, sorry. And I just want us to read it so we understand it. It is wrapped together with aspects for which we do not think meaningful end-user consent is possible to obtain. In particular, cross-site access to the user, to the end-user's local file system. Overall, we consider this harmful, therefore, but Mozilla could be supportive of parts, provided this were segmented better. So this basically just says their position, what I explained. They think it's not possible to obtain end-user consent for all scenarios. So some users might be tricked, something like that, and in those cases. It's worth mentioning that this API can't access just any file or directory on your system. Obviously, system files and directories like, I don't know, system32 can't be accessed. If you try to do that, there will be an error pop up like, I can't access this, I can't go there. we'll see a GitHub issue regarding this in a little bit. Okay, quickly I want to go over what streams are. Raise of hands, what are streams? If somebody knows, if you've used streams. Why is only one person raising their hand? Guys, come on, streams. Everybody's used streams. Yeah, so how do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite, right? Yeah, this is Georgie's joke. So streams allow reading or writing data in chunks rather than loading the entire into memory. So this is how you can get over that problem of loading a big file in memory and making your browser crash. You can do that with the file API, like I said, but sometimes it's not enough. They are useful for writing with large files or processing data incrementally. The file system, sorry, forgot to remove the access. File system API integrates with JavaScript streams. It uses streams intensively for everything, and everything is a promise. You have to await literally everything. Okay, sorry. That's enough theory, that's enough of the basics of this API. I just wanted to get it out of the way, just to introduce you guys to it, and now let's take a look. Just to note, if you use Chrome, the file system API is enabled by default. If you use Brave like me, you have to explicitly enable it. So it's disabled by default. Again, scary concerns, but at least Brave supports it and allows the user to enable it. I think Edge is the same. You have to enable it explicitly, but like I said, Mozilla doesn't support it, and neither does Safari. Okay. So, just to mention some things. Since this API is so new, it's so limited in what it can do. You can only access files, you can access directories, and it's actually pretty hard to navigate those directories. That's why over here we have a custom utility function that me and Georgie created for solving a problem that we had. We had to write an explicit async generator to get all file paths. When you access a file or directory, you don't get the path. You get just the handler, and then you get the name, the extension, and stuff like that. And when you try to save stuff, you actually want the file path, right? You want the actual path. Where's the file? What can I do with it? Kind of ironic that this API doesn't support this already out of the box. So we had to write our own generator function to get all file paths, which wasn't a big issue, right? I mean, it was a fun exercise. Another thing is that if you want to find something recursively that's buried deep, like accessing a directory and you want some file handler, it doesn't support that out of the box. You have to write your own recursive function that returns a promise, and you have to await. And those are the two functions we needed for the project that we were doing, because we had to traverse different paths. We basically wanted to allow the web app to do whatever it wanted with a selected directory. And because the API is still so limited, we couldn't actually do everything we wanted. Okay, now let's take a look at a practical example. Photop. Anybody familiar with this site? Yes, yes, okay, I see a few raised hands. We're actually going to take a look at this site quickly, because I want to show you, sorry. I'm actually going to quickly jump to Chrome, right? So this is Photop. This is a free Photoshop, right? And you can do more with it. I don't use it. I just know what it is. Now, if we go to Documents, and let's say you want to open this image of me, right? Cool. Nothing happens. Let's try to do something to this image, right? Let's get a big old smile there. Right? Probably should have drawn a mustache. That would have been funnier. But if we go to the Save option, oh, what's that? Do you usually see that when you try to save a file or something using the File API? Not really, right? If you see this prompt, we'll be able to edit this image. Do you want to save changes? This is the file system API in action. Once we click Save Changes, grant access, and all the stuff, Photopea now has access to this image, but it also has access to the files where that image is, in a way. So I just wanted to show you quickly how that looks, the actual prompt that the user gets. And this is stateless. I forgot to mention that. This is made stateless intentionally. If I close this, open it again, if I try to open the same file again from a new tab or a new browser instance, it's going to prompt me again. If I try to open another file and then save that file, it's going to prompt me again. Is that annoying? Probably, yeah. But that's one of the security features that Google has created. It's done that intentionally as to not raise the security level. Back to the presentation, I want to quickly show you the documentation. Oops. Okay. Immediately, two things jump out at us. This feature is available only in secure contexts and in some or all supporting browsers. This feature is available for workflow. Okay. There was another banner info here that said this feature is very experimental, so be careful what you're doing with it. And we can see the interfaces this API offers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. Wow. It's not every day you see a browser API offer you so little, right? And then we have the methods, the ones I mentioned: the show file picker, the save file picker, etc., etc., etc. Let's quickly look at how this looks. So we have some methods here. We have get file, create async access handle, create writable, which is used to write to files and folders. That's it. It doesn't offer very much. And the same goes for the directory handle, etc., etc. Here we can see a quick example. Open a file picker, get file content, return the file data. Pretty simple, right? Here we have creating a writable. This allows us to write content, and then we have to close the writer in order to actually write out the content. This is familiar. This should be familiar from other concepts. And we have synchronous reading and writing to a file. Not really interested in that. I don't want to block anything. But this is basically it. So on the surface level, it's very simple. It looks like the file API, but the logic behind it, it's what makes it powerful. So I just quickly want to show a few more links, some fights in the comment sections on GitHub. So this is an issue opened on the actual file system access API, and it was opened by Photopea. This is from January 2023, and he's saying that very often people write me that they want to access a specific folder, but the Chrome browser does not allow them to. This is the same prompt. Well, it's not really the same prompt. This is the prompt you get when the file system API refuses to load content or enter some directory because it's not allowed to, right? Some private directories, user directories, stuff that it can't access that's made by that. So here, he's basically complaining that the users are complaining they actually want to get to all the files. And here we can say, telling web developers that there is a great new API which lets you and your users modify files easily, but not telling them that it will open a huge number of important directories is like giving someone a brand new plane, but not telling them that it can fly for 1 minute. There are a lot of comments also, debates, and stuff like that. Here, this is one of the, I think this is one of the developers and maintainers of this API actually. And here we have the developer of Photopea saying, I still think the user should have a right to modify any file, even a system file. What do you guys think? Should we allow that? I don't know. Maybe, right? So you can see already from this, it is very debated. And it's not like people are not discussing about this. This API is still in development. People are still heavily debating. And there are a lot of discussions you can find on Google. On GitHub especially, I just want to show you this one quickly. So this is basically a user raising the question, what's Mozilla's stance on this API? And it's actually a request for Mozilla position on emerging web specifications, and here we have the file system API. It's for other stuff, but the focus was the file system API. And you can read through this if you want. You can find it pretty easily. Type on Google Mozilla file system API GitHub issues. You can find it quickly if you want to read through it. I encourage you to read through it. There are some interesting discussions, and I was kidding actually, they didn't fight, but you can, even if you're not in the room, you can feel the tension in the comments between Mozilla employees and users and stuff like that. Comment has been minimized, stuff like that. And yeah, so this API would be enormously useful, right? And then you have guys underneath denouncing that, saying, oh, it's not good, like, it's not better. I don't think any of the cited protections are enough, right? This is the first thing we discussed about security. So they still think it's not enough. Okay. Right. Okay. That's it. Guys, thank you so much for your attention. My main goal was to show you guys the actual API. Get you familiar with it, show you what's happening, what you can do with it quickly, what's it used for, and some discussions that you guys should probably read about afterwards for the security concerns. I hope you guys had some inspirational moments and think of a way you can use this API in your, I don't know, work projects. Well, probably not your work projects because it's still in development, but maybe some pet projects. Think of stuff you can do with this because it is very powerful. And a practical example that me and Georgi actually had to do, it was more like a proof of concept. We had to allow the application to load a folder, read files, write to files, but like I said, the files were very large and they had to be packaged, so zipped up, stuff like that, and we basically couldn't do that. The requirement was that it had to be on the client side. We couldn't do it on the server side. I mean, we could, but it would be a lot of work. So we actually did this as a proof of concept with the file system API. It worked. It worked great. We could stream and zip, compress, decompress 10, 20 gigabyte files. The computer RAM didn't budge at all. So it was great. But eventually, the specifications for the task changed and blah, blah, blah. It only stayed as a proof of concept. We didn't actually implement it in production. So this has practical uses. Of course, we should wait until it is a bit more secure. So, of course, don't use it for production apps. Use it for pet projects or your own applications. Again, thank you so much. You've been an amazing audience, and Q&A time.